the problems of the world are complex. Confronted with financial crisis, with conflict, war, climate change. In fact, one of the main problems is the lack of sustainability. We're just using too much resources, and in fact, for some resources this is critical, like nitrogen, phosphor, and even water, if we look at the entire planet. And for that reason, our world is in bad shape. We see signs of destabilization everywhere, and that actually creates existential threats. The question is how to solve all these existential problems. And classically, we have a number of approaches. One of these approaches is based on Adam Smith's thinking. So it says everyone should just do what's best for himself or herself, and every company too, and then altogether that would create benefits for the economy and for the society. Unfortunately, the invisible hand isn't always there, right? Where was it when the financial crisis came up? Also, there are tragedies of the common, such as environmental pollution, overfishing, and so on. And for this reason, the state steps in and says, we cannot just let it go. We need to have a strong state that represents the interests of the people. We need to come up with laws that limit what people can do. And then, of course, there are a lot of complaints that business people cannot innovate anymore as they would like to. And on the other hand, besides overregulation, there is another problem that we can't pay for the system any longer. Most industrial states are absolutely over-indebted, so nobody has any idea how we should ever pay back all those debts. So we need a big step ahead. And so the question is, what alternatives do we have? In fact, in the past few years, a number of new technologies came up that have changed governance enormously without the public noticing that. Big data is just one of these examples. So suddenly there is data about everything. Every single step we do, every activity, whether we go shopping, whether we do anything online, whether we move, this leaves digital traces, and altogether that creates big data. And that big data, of course, can help us to understand certain problems and also to solve a number of them. So we have a much better understanding now of epidemic spreading, and that allows us to prepare much better for this. We can understand other more positive spreading processes, such as the spreading of novel knowledge in the world. We can measure the spreading of single ideas and concepts, for example, as we have done that in physics. We never had such a clear picture of the main concepts in physics before and how they evolved over time. So that's quite interesting. And we can also map cultural spreading using the birth death data of artists over 2,000 years. So we can put that into a movie. So there, if you go to the internet, you would find a very nice movie about the spreading of culture over hundreds of years. So suddenly it becomes so obvious. And we can also see the patterns that don't change over centuries. Now, of course, we can use big data for good. And some people would go a step further and would say, well, if we just had enough data, we wouldn't need theory any longer. Chris Anderson formulated that in a Wired magazine article, and that has been very influential. So the question is, can we one day know everything that goes on in the world, and maybe even in real time? Could we build a crystal ball? And maybe a crystal ball that would allow us even to look into the future. That's the kind of question that people have been asking, and some people are pretty serious about this. There are crystal ball projects in the world, so this kind of technology is being built. And the question is, what could we do with it? Could we optimize the world? Could we rule the world like a wise king or a benevolent dictator and come up with the best solution for the world and for everyone? That's the kind of question that drives a lot of technology today. Now, unfortunately, big data is not the universal tool to understand and govern the world. First of all, big data does often not reveal the causes. Even if we could measure the trajectories of all these bullets, we couldn't understand the reason why, what caused the war. And this is what we need to understand, really. And another thing that often happens is that there is spurious correlations, such as over here, the number of serial killers as a function of chocolate consumption. Well, if that was a causality relation, then it would be very dangerous to live in Switzerland. There's another problem that in many cases we want to separate good and bad risks. Yeah? Terrorists from normal people, people who produce a lot of medical costs from other people who wouldn't produce much medical costs, and so on and so on. But what you usually have is 2 point clouds that are overlaying. And so it's very different to separate these point clouds from each other, and errors will occur. So false alarms or other cases where you don't respond, we know that problem actually from trying to identify terrorists. For every real terrorist, there are about 1,000 people who are innocent but are classified to be potential terrorists. And that is one of the reasons why all this surveillance actually doesn't help so much, because there are millions of people on this list of potentially suspicious people, and you cannot put them all into prison. There is a further problem that by using big data analytics, we might actually unintentionally discriminate people. So just assume we would have a health insurance that pays people a premium that eat more salad than steaks, and these kind of things, you know. Then unintentionally what would happen is that Christians and Jews and Muslims would probably pay different tariffs, although that was not the intention of this. And then there is a problem, right? Because there's implicit discrimination. So these are just some of the problems that come along with big data tools and analytics. And the other problem is these tools can be quite powerful, and powerful tools attract bad people, right? Terrorists, criminals, extremists. And so we have an explosion of cybercrime. This costs us $3 billion, no, it's $3 trillion every year in the world, and it's still exponentially exploding. So this is pretty expensive. The other problem is that all companies and institutions have been hacked in the past, right? And that includes the US military, that includes the Pentagon, that includes the White House, it includes the Bundestag. So how would we protect those powerful tools from misuse? Well, so maybe we need something better, and the question is, would artificial intelligence solve our problems? Because there has been a rapid increase actually of the power of these artificially intelligent systems, and in about 5 to 40 years, let's say maybe in 20 years on average, according to experts' estimates, computers would overtake humans in their abilities. So we have already seen that in the past we have had better chess players, better workers in many areas, better drivers apparently. Then IBM Watson is better in answering questions in many cases and may also be better than many doctors. So we see that robots become more and more capable and sophisticated. So this one can play table tennis, but they could also make an omelette or whatever. And they can learn, so they get smarter. They're not programmed anymore line by line. They're evolving. They can reproduce themselves. They could build other robots, and they could build smarter robots, right? So there is a new species here in the block, and it's an intelligent species that becomes rapidly more and more intelligent. So this has raised the question, could society be run like a giant machine, right? Could we identify all the pieces and how they interact with each other and how they can be manipulated, and could in this way our society be optimized? Yes, and it seems that Google is working on this and wants to reprogram society. And therefore, after the invention of self-driving cars, I think the automation of society is next. How would that work, actually? Well, one would apply algorithms such as deep learning in order to learn what people do, why they do it, and how they can manipulate it. So the overall idea is knowledge is power, so the more data, the more knowledge, the more power. And so basically the question is, could we create technologies that would allow us to influence the course of the future? And that means also people's decisions and actions, something like a magic wand. And in fact, if that was possible, then it would be based on personalized information, right? So our attention is steered by the information that we get, and that would also influence our decision making. And in fact, Google is using these technologies for some time now for personalized advertisements, but there are many other companies that do a similar thing, recommender systems of all kinds, you know. They're all over the place on the web. And that has become interesting for politics too, where it comes under the name of nudging. And it's considered by some people to be liberal paternalism, but in fact what's happening here is that politics is not only interested in what people are doing by mass surveillance, but they also care about you to do the right thing. And in fact, it seems like we are pretty much already remotely controlled. If you look at people, they look at their smartphone more than at their partners in many cases, and they walk around like this, yeah? So that's the typical picture today. Now, this leads to something that some people would call a cybernetic society. And in fact, the idea goes back into the 70s, where the Allende regime in Chile was actually trying to implement such a system. Just, of course, technology was much more primitive at that time, and this was not about behavioral control at that time, but about optimizing production. But today, Singapore considered itself as a social laboratory. So, you know, people are experimental subjects. And the question is, what is the outcome of such a technology? Well, personalized information seems to have a number of unwanted side effects. So one of them is actually that there is progressive polarization. That means different people, say different political parties, are not able anymore to understand each other, talk to each other, and find compromises. So there would be more conflict. And the reason for this is that personalized information creates echo chambers, something like a filter bubble. So we don't see the world anymore in a neutral, in an unbiased way, but we see the world as it is presented to us. And many things we don't see because nobody wants us to see them. Well, given such a system, then of course, how should we be innovative and think out of the box? But this is exactly what we need now. We need massive innovation. Yeah, we need mass innovation. Every one of us needs to be more creative. And how can we be creative if our thinking is not free anymore? If that is actually controlled by a computer algorithm. And in fact, we know that if people's decision making is influenced, then this undermines the wisdom of crowds. So I think this is not good for society. In fact, if it was good for society, why do we have so many problems, so many unsolved problems? So all this nudging, using your personal data that has been collected by your computer and your smartphone by somebody you don't know and being used to manipulate it, this apparently hasn't solved the problems that we're confronted with. And by the way, if you have been asking yourself, would we be punished if we don't follow that information that's given to us, the instruction that comes via our smartphone? Well, maybe not at the moment, but the underlying idea of this entire cybernetic society is this one. So it goes back to Skinner, who's done these experiments with mice and rats and other animals, and there was a punishment and a reward mechanism to make these animals do certain kind of things, or not do certain kind of things, right? I'm not sure we would be allowed to do these experiments today again, but in fact, now it's us who are living in these Skinner boxes, and the Skinner boxes go under the name filter bubble. Every single day, Google and other companies are experimenting with us, Facebook too. They have published about experiments with millions of people. And of course, there was a public outcry about this, a shitstorm, as we would say today. And that's one of my concerns about personalized pricing, because that could be misused actually to really condition people to do things as wanted by some company that's has their headquarters not even in Europe, right? And I recently noticed that many games for children are also of this kind actually. So there is already this reward mechanism, this feedback mechanism, and their censorship mechanism. So they're already raised in this system, which from my point of view, is actually partially totalitarian in character and would become more and more totalitarian. Here is an example. Citizen Score has been introduced in China on a voluntary basis at the moment. By 2020, however, it's written it should become a public policy. So what happens here is that every citizen, whatever he or she does, would earn points or minus points. So if you click the wrong links in the internet, if you don't have the right kind of political opinion, if your neighbors would do the wrong thing or your friend would do the wrong thing, you would get minus points. And the implications would be you wouldn't get a loan, perhaps, you wouldn't get certain kind of jobs, and you wouldn't get travel visa to other countries. I think nobody really here wants to live in such a society. Unfortunately, this is being done even though we already know it's not working, because a similar system is applied actually at US airports. They also have a score which makes you suspicious or not, because they want to know whether you are a potential terrorist. So what would be suspicious? This is suspicious. Yeah? Minus points. That is suspicious too. Again, minus points. Even this is suspicious. Everything that is just different from not doing anything special is suspicious. Do you see the point? And those who work with the system say behind, kind of unofficially, they say that this is not really working. But for sure, this is not compatible with democracy at all, right? So there is a danger that we would lose self-determination, freedom, human dignity, assumed innocence, fairness and justice, pursuit of happiness, pluralism, and many other things. So I think we need to pay attention, because otherwise all of these things that are important for us will be gone for 20, 30 years or forever. So pay attention, alert other people, because this scenario is much closer than you think. So, an intermediate summary is that this magic formula, assuming that more data would mean more knowledge, more power, more security, and more success, doesn't really work. It's true that people are surprisingly predictable. In fact, there are a company like Recorded Future that collects data about everything you do, and that is pretty successful in predicting where you will be next Thursday afternoon at 2 o'clock and whom you would meet. And nevertheless, we cannot predict the course of society, because society is not a machine, it's not deterministic, it cannot be steered like a car. And why is this? Because interactions change everything. As you can see, nobody wants this stop-and-go traffic to happen, but it happens. And so even if we could look into the heads of every single driver, we would know every single thought of all these drivers. If we had the perfect surveillance system, it couldn't prevent these traffic jams from happening. Why is this? Because there is some mathematics that allows us to understand this stop-and-go phenomenon. And there are no thoughts in it at all. It's just the density that matters. And above a certain critical density, small variations in speed are amplified, and that creates a cascade effect that finally leads to an undesirable outcome. And of course, we know that from real life. One day you might meet somebody, you fall in love, and that changes your entire life. And if you're an important person, that could change history even. We've done experiments in our lab that are extremely accurate in predicting individual decisions. 96% of all decisions have been well predicted. But the macro level outcome was entirely wrong. How is this possible? Well, the reason again is that this is an unstable system where small deviations can actually trigger a cascade of events that would create a completely different outcome. And that's why adding some noise to this highly accurate model, making it less accurate in predicting individual decisions, creates better predictions of the macro level, that means of the societal level. That is kind of surprising. So what I'm claiming here is that more surveillance wouldn't give you necessarily any better results in predicting the future of society. And there are basically two kinds of situations: stable ones and unstable ones. So if you have a stable situation, it's like good weather. You don't really need to care about it because the system is stable, so self-sustaining in a sense. So it doesn't matter much if somebody makes a mistake. But if there is an unstable situation, well, then we need to care. But in these kind of situations, systems tend to get out of control, and in many cases in unpredictable ways. That means exactly in those situations where we need these predictive tools, they often don't work very well. That's the kind of problem, right? We don't need to have a good weather prediction. And the reason is very similar to what we know actually from weather forecasting. Turbulence is a physical phenomenon that implies that small changes would have potentially very different outcomes over some time period. And that means even if we would have 10 times or 100 times or 1,000,000 times more data points, we could never predict the weather in 2 months' time exactly. It's just impossible because physics doesn't allow it. Now, unfortunately, those problems in the world that we haven't solved are exactly of this kind. They're based on systemic instability. Yeah. Besides traffic congestion, unstable supply chains, and of course booms and recessions. This is just the same thing on a large scale. Crowd disasters are one example. Crime is another example. You see these oscillations again, right? Tragedies of the commons. Cooperation would be desirable, but it's not stable, and that's why it doesn't happen to the extent we need it. It's like this free traffic flow that was not stable even though that was desirable. So the invisible hand doesn't always work. Conflicts and also revolutions. So all of these problems are based on systemic instabilities. That's the problem. And as I said, their surveillance doesn't help much because you can see what happens as it happens. You can see the accident happen, but you cannot prevent it. So it's really a matter of systems design. If you want to prevent it, you have to change the system. And the reason is, in these systems, small perturbations can really mess up the entire system. So it starts harmless, but eventually, everything gets out of order. And we've seen that, for example, during the financial crisis, where the bankruptcy of Lehman Brothers caused bankruptcies of hundreds of banks all over the world, and that created actually losses of hundreds of billions of dollars. So, in many cases, there is an illusion of control. No matter how powerful you are, you may not be able to control what happens. And here is the example, right? What happened in the aftermath of September 11 got more and more out of control, we could say. The wars on Afghanistan and Iraq didn't really end as expected. Instead, we had a spreading of international tension, of political tension to other countries. We saw the Arab Spring. So now many countries are in a more or less unstable situation, and it has given rise to further problems, as we know it from Syria, where nobody really knows the solution. And there a lot of cities and culture have been destroyed and weakened, and as a result terrorism came up, Islamic State, and now we are threatened by terrorism here in our countries. And not only this, it has also created a refugee crisis. So thousands, 1 million people are trying to escape that disaster. And fences can't keep them away. No matter how high those fences are, there is no solution. It's a cascade effect that got out of control. So, as an intermediate conclusion, the solution is not more power. The solution is more wisdom. We need to understand these systems much better. We all know that taking more medicine is not better. It's poisonous for our body, right? Our body is also a complex system. So we can learn from what we know about how medicine affects our body if we think about trying to change society. So then, how should we use computer simulations, if not for predicting the future of the world? I think we should use it to understand complex dynamical systems. And in many cases it turns out that models with fewer parameters and fewer data can be more powerful, because sometimes there's an overfitting effect if you have a lot of data and you fit your data to something that's not meaningful. These spurious correlations, for example. And so some years ago, Google's Blue Trend was celebrated as one of the prime examples of the success of big data analytics. But in the meantime, we know it's not working so well as expected. In fact, there are better approaches that combine some data with a model approach, and then you can turn this messy data that is really hard to understand about the spreading of diseases into something which is well ordered and well understandable, because now you can understand the spreading of diseases considering the air travel behavior of people. Of course, that is the main point here. How many people travel between different cities by airplanes? We now have actually models to understand pedestrian flows and crowd disasters. We have models for traffic congestion. We have models for booms and recessions, for the behavior of power grids and blackouts. We have models for gas supply networks and their resilience. We have models for social systems too, for behavioral conventions, coordination, cooperation, and the breakdown of cooperation. We have models for the spreading of crime, for the evolution of moral behavior, models for the evolution of social preferences, models for the emergence of social norms, and for the occurrence of conflict. So in fact, in the past years, we've learned a lot about how our society works, how we can understand certain kinds of problems. And so why don't we put all these different models together to understand better what's going on in the world? And that was actually the idea of the Future ICT Living Earth simulator. Now, I thought I would spend the rest of my life on modeling societal problems better and better, and I'll come up with more and more sophisticated mathematical models, formulas. But then, 2 years ago, I suddenly reduced my efforts to model this world. That's probably surprising to you. And so you probably wonder why I did that. Well, I came to the conclusion that the world in 20 years' time would be very different from the world today. So why model this world if we will have a different world when I'm finished with modeling this world, you know? And the main point here is that we are in the middle of a digital revolution. And so we will see a transformation of our economy and society as we have seen that several times in the past, when there was a transition from the agricultural to the industrial society, and from there, later on, to the service society. Now we will see a transition to the digital society. Now, unfortunately, these transitions were never smooth, right? They came with financial and economic crisis. They also came with revolutions and wars. Obviously, we do have already a financial and economic crisis in many countries. We don't want revolutions and wars, so we really need to learn from history how to do it better this time, because otherwise we'll be in big trouble. So, many of the jobs that we have today will be gone in 20 years' time, 50% approximately. You know? And that is shocking. Yeah, we've never seen such a situation before. Actually, that might endanger social peace, political peace throughout Europe. And actually, there are just about 4 countries where young people still find jobs easily, which is Switzerland, Austria, Germany, and Sweden. That's it. It looks like we're seeing eventually a gradual collapse in Europe. And this is not just bad for employees, it's also bad for companies, because 40% of today's top 500 companies will be gone in 10 years' time. So everyone is threatened. Yeah? Günther Oettinger recently in Zurich said, this is a struggle for survival for companies, but also for Europe. It's a struggle for survival. So, I think our society is at a crossroads, and we could get into a situation where we lose democracy and even capitalism. There are no jobs, people have no money, cannot buy goods. That's bad for companies, that's bad for the economy, that's bad for the society, right? This is the scenario we need to avoid. Instead, we should try to marry capitalism and democracy. And in fact, I believe that can now be done with a new technology, the Internet of Things. So at least we need a plan B. Yeah? We cannot just let things happen. So we need to think about the organizational principles of our future world, because it will be working according to entirely different rules. So the new approach will be mechanism and systems design. And this is what I'm now putting all my energy into, right? So the idea is, if we understand the forces behind societal and economic change, we can actually use these forces for us, like in Asian martial arts, right? We can make these forces do work for us. And the question is, what kind of adaptations can we do for the future world? And there's a long list over here, so as the slides and the recording will be available for you. I'm not reading it all loud over here, so digital literacy, distributed design, control, participator opportunities, and so on. Trust, many things. So I believe if we do all these things, then this will increase resilience, sustainability, efficiency, innovation, opportunities, job, wealth, power, and happiness. That means we should really do these kind of things. And in times where we cannot predict the future reliably, where many unexpected and maybe some bad things may happen, what we really bitterly need is a resilient design of our society. So let's look back, what Alexander the Great did with this Gordian knot that I showed in the beginning. Well, he cut the knot, right? So basically, if interdependency and over-networked systems create all these undesirable and uncontrollable cascade effects, what we need is decentralization, modularity, distributed control. So as the complexity of systems goes up, in order to achieve our goals, we need to have a higher level of autonomy. Of course, that also requires to take more responsibility. But why is this? Well, basically, it's true that data are exploding exponentially. So we're getting from a situation where we didn't have enough data to take good decisions into a situation where we can take evidence-based decisions. But still, this is not enough data to keep up with the complexity of the world that is exploding even faster as we go on networking the world. And as a result, top-down control will less and less succeed as we see it. We see it many times, and we need to realize it. We need a paradigm shift. We need distributed control, otherwise it won't work. So that leads us to the principle of locality. That means reach global goals based on local interactions. And there are a number of reasons why this is a good approach. It's scalable, it works for complex dynamical systems, it's more resilient, it supports collective intelligence, it's compatible with privacy, freedom, democracy, it promotes innovation, it's more efficient, cheaper, and I believe if well built, it also increases security and so on. So, another interesting thing is actually that we can now build self-organizing systems, and so we can now build self-organizing systems. We can make the invisible hand work by using the Internet of Things. So how to make self-organization work? Well, it requires a number of different steps. So first of all, we need to understand complex dynamical systems. As I've explained before, difficult to understand, predict, and control, but they tend to self-organize, and that means they tend to come up with certain kind of structures, properties, and functions. These structures, properties, and functions depend on the kind of interactions. If we change the interactions, we change the outcome. We change the structure, properties, and function of the system, right? And that can be done in a targeted way, in a tailored way. So if we want to reach a certain kind of outcome, we need to ask the question, what kind of interactions does it take to produce these outcomes through self-organization? And so there are a number of different techniques to get there. Computer simulations, and this is how I would use a supercomputer, to create all these interaction mechanisms that would allow for all sorts of self-organizing systems, millions of innovations. Experiments, interactive virtual worlds, exploratories. Now, once you know what kind of interactions we would need to reach certain outcomes, and the question is, how do we get there? How can we change the interaction that we have today? And that requires basically feedback mechanism in real time, and that means also real-time data. Where would we get these data? Well, from NervousNet, right? And how would we produce the feedback mechanisms? Through a multidimensional finance system or value exchange system. So this is the plan. This is what we need to build. So NervousNet, what is this about? Well, basically we can now use our smartphones. And all these sensors of this wonderful Internet of Things is now becoming available to make measurements. There are about 15 sensors in every smartphone. Yeah, we typically don't use them. Most people don't know about them even, right? But we can open them up. We can connect all these smartphones to build a global measurement system, a real-time measurement system. So, for example, we could measure acceleration. And if all our smartphones would start shaking at the same time, then that would certainly be an earthquake, right? So we would want our friends and family to be warned so they can get out into a safe space. Well, certainly being able to do such kind of collective measurements, we don't need to spy on individual behaviors here. So this is about averaging over many measurements, right? Such a system would be nice to have, I believe. And maybe actually some companies without our knowledge, or some public institution without our knowledge, are already collecting this kind of data. But we'd like to have a system that we can trust, right? And that we can use for our purposes, so we can use it to innovate, to come up with services and products and collect information in a targeted way, as I will explain later on when it comes about mapping our environment. So that cannot be done by the Secret Service, right? So a system that we can trust, how can we build it? Well, I think we need to take informational self-determination seriously. And that's what we do. So if you download NervousNet, then you can decide yourself which sensors to open up and whether you want to use the measurement data for yourself or you want to share them with others. You can decide that for every single sensor, right? Besides that, the plan is to enforce laws, or to come up with laws that would basically require everyone who produces data about anyone to send these data into a personal mailbox, data mailbox. And there you could then determine with whom to share what kind of data, for what kind of purpose, for what period of time. So you could decide you want to open up your shopping data to companies because you want to get personalized products. But maybe you don't. Then you don't open up the data. You might want to share your social contact data with your friends. Maybe not. Yeah, you should decide this. Maybe you want to share your health data with your doctor. Maybe with your partner, maybe not, you know. So basically, we should be in control of this. And so the overall idea is that we should operate and build the Internet of Things as a citizen web. Because if that Internet of Things would be controlled by a single company or by the state, every single step we do, every word we say could be recorded sooner or later. You know, that would be kept forever. It would be a nightmare. You know, if other people control the data about us, we cannot control them. We cannot control our lives anymore. Others will control our lives. So this is really essential. I'm not the only one thinking in this way. Actually, there is a nice document of IBM that says about device democracy, that says this is what we need to do to save the Internet of Things. Because either democracy will die or the Internet of Things will die if we don't make the Internet of Things compatible with democracy. This is pretty clear. I mean, we need to understand this. So if we think we should keep democracy, then we need to build a democratic Internet of Things. There's no other way. But if we had that, well, that would be nice because it allows us to create greater awareness compasses for decision makers. We could measure things that we can see, social capital, reputation, trust, important for our society, obviously. And we could map noise, we could map luminosity, and many other things. And in fact, if we want to solve our sustainability problems, then the number one principle is that we need to increase positive externalities, reduce negative ones, and ensure a fair compensation. Well, there's also a possibility to turn your smartphone into something like a radar system, right? And in fact, we have created a game called Treasure Hunt, which you can download. Maybe you should do that, because I have actually hidden some beacons in this room. And you could try to detect these beacons, right? You need to turn on the Bluetooth for this, and if you have an iPhone, then you can also sabotage. Don't worry. So what it does is it turns you into a beacon. That means you appear to be a treasure for somebody else, so you irritate your competitors, but you can't see the treasures during that time, right? So that's kind of the... You have to decide whether you want to do that or not. But try it, because it's a nice game. And of course, gamification is important to spread technologies among people. Yeah, we know how difficult this is, but it's important if we want to transform into a digital society successfully and compete with other countries. We can map crises, we can map resources and reuses them. And in fact, for this, we have created another app that you can download, which is called Swarm Pulse. And what you can do over there, you can do geolocated measurements of noise or light, or put a text in a certain location. And that could also be a link to a photograph or to a movie. And so it becomes clear that we could take pictures of our environment and map it. I mean, create a map of our environment, including all the different trees, all the different birds, all the butterflies, and whatever might be important for us and for sustainability. We can create real-time feedback on many levels of society, and that's actually useful if you want to get rid of these terrible traffic jams, right? So this is a visualization of these traffic jams that we have today. And if you're patient with me, then we will eventually see what's the reason for these traffic jams. So I'll shortly elevate ourselves from this car to get a better view. And yes, what we see is that there is actually an on-ramp, so cars try to get on the freeway. That produces small disruptions. These disruptions are amplified, and that causes the stop-and-go traffic. Now, assume that we equip these cars, or just 30–40% of them, with radar sensors that measure the distance and relative velocity of the cars, and automatically drive. We did that actually long before people were talking about Google cars. And as you can see, this automatic adaptation allows to dissolve the traffic jam. How did we do that? We changed the interactions between the cars in such a way that it would stabilize the traffic flow and increase its lighting. We've also come up with a self-organized traffic light control for cities. And it turns out this is extremely successful. It reduces the travel times for all modes of traffic, and it's also good for our environment. And similar distributed real-time control approaches are now more and more important actually for smart grids and also for smart production, where those different products could actually talk to other products and to the machines and tell them what to do with them. Then the question is, can we also apply these sensational and interesting approaches to our society? Can we build digital assistants? Yeah? Can we build assistance systems for cooperation, for example? And in fact, Elinor Ostrom, who got the Nobel Prize, has shown that self-governance can be efficient given proper design principles. So again, the kind of interactions are important. And there are, in fact, a number of decentralized mechanisms to promote cooperation and social order to overcome tragedies of the commons, for example, or conflicts. So it's possible to transform social dilemmas into something else with social mechanisms such as reputation systems or merit-based matching, where basically those who are more cooperative would interact with other people who are more cooperative. And interestingly enough, that creates a trend towards more cooperation altogether. Competition is another mechanism that can raise the level of cooperation, interestingly enough. But anyway, we can build digital assistants for all sorts of situations, to create situational awareness, to help us in all sorts of interactions, to avoid lossful encounters, and so on and so on. So I believe we will see an era of social-inspired technologies that support cooperation, produce trust, social norms, culture, and so on. And social capital is actually the basis of society, so we should learn how to build it. And of course, we're living in a highly diverse world, so we need to have support, right? We need to have interoperability in some sense. But again, digital assistants can help. Today, you can download apps that would do real-time translation. So you speak into this app, and on the other side, in the other phone that you call, what you said would come out in a different language. Spanish, Japanese, Chinese, whatever. So that's fantastic, of course, and we could build other digital assistants to help us overcome cultural barriers. I do actually think that exactly at these fault lines between cultures will be the biggest potential to create new social and economic value. And to unleash it, I propose to come up with a cultural genome project that would reveal the success principles of these different cultures in the world and to make it operational. And finally, collective intelligence will be extremely important to master our problems in a more and more complex world, because the complexity is beyond our own understanding. So we need to bring the knowledge and ideas of many minds together. And interestingly enough, for collective intelligence to work well, we require diversity. Diversity wins, not the best. And this is extremely interesting. And so in order to allow collective intelligence to thrive, and we will need that to govern our future society, we need to build online liberation platforms that allow us to bring together all that knowledge that we have. So we need now to build Democracy 2.0, this Government 4.0 system where people can participate more with their ideas and their engagement to solve problems. In fact, I'd like to point out that the most diverse societies are also the most innovative, right? This is very important, and the most diverse economies are the most successful. So diversity is really highly important. So in conclusion, I'd like to say we need to move from the paradigm of power to the paradigm of empowerment. To keep up with the pace at which the world is changing, we need a large-scale participatory approach. And that's why crowdsourcing and citizen science and all this becomes so important, right? So we need to create a participatory system, an open data source, but in real time, according to the Wikipedia principle. So it's really about sharing data and sharing code in order to come up really with exponential or combinatorial innovation. So if we create new opportunities for everyone, then Enabling users, customers, and citizens will lead to better services and products, to better businesses, better neighborhoods, smarter cities, and smarter societies. And how to create new jobs, right? 50% of jobs are gone one day, in 20 years from now. We have to reinvent half of our economy. Half of our economy, right? So what I believe is that besides this classical paradigm of rationalization, this is how we made money in the past in many cases, we need to have a new paradigm, a complementary paradigm, built on co-creation, right? And it's very interesting that information in a sense is unlimited, you know. It doesn't matter if we share it, it's even better if we share it because it creates more value. It's not a zero-sum game. Right? So this new digital economy, this immaterial economy that really benefits from sharing, from co-creation, from creating opportunities for others to add value. And if we learn that this new economy works in an entirely different way, then we can create all these new jobs. So we need to learn to think in ecosystems. Let me speed up a little bit. So the idea is that if we have enough interoperability, then we can combine existing services and products to build new services and products. And this creates combinatorial opportunities. That means combinatorial growth. So the only thing is that we need to make sure this interoperability, sufficient openness, that means open data, open innovation will be certainly extremely important paradigms in the future. So finally, everything I believe can come together, science, politics, business, society, and maybe even religion. Because we can now reach massively increased efficiency by engaging in building self-organizing, self-improving systems. And the nice thing about this decentralized approach is that it's compatible with democratic principles, with autonomy of decision-making, with entrepreneurial freedom. But we would now have to consider externalities, which we can measure now with the Internet of Things. And in this way, we will come up with fairer interactions, more cooperation, less conflict, and solve our environmental issues. You know, so the Internet of Things is really, if well used, yeah, not the way we use it today, but if we use it well, in a democratic way, then it would help to solve our problems. So it's time to build digital democracy. And this is good for politics, for business, and for everyone. So let's do this together. Thank you very much.